The clutch is working correctly. This is the next set of parts that we will install. Be certain at this point that that big gear is meshed with the pinion gear of the starter motor. Then we're going to install this lever assembly with the fork under the washer as always. And before we do that, we will grease the head of that bronze bolt and grease the end of the starter shaft. If you're repairing a right side starter, check this lever assembly closely. Be certain that the lever axle bolts are lubricated. When they get dry, they'll work loose possibly. Those little bolts should be red Loctited into that block and then greased so that the levers pivot on them. Do not let the Loctite that you use lock up the lever assembly. So that's the maintenance, but when it arrives in the box new, you don't have to worry about that. It's all been taken care of. So we get the lever assembly mounted, and then we loosen the jam nut on the bronze bolt. We want to hold in at the bottom at the fork and simultaneously screw the bronze bolt in towards the starter shaft. When it begins to lift the fork, we stop and back up perhaps a quarter turn and lock the jam nut. We want very little lash at this point, but we do not want it to prematurely lift the fork either. Once that is adjusted, we can install the spline sprocket in the chain, leaving the gap for the master link here at the upper left so we can access it. And this bent nose needle nose pliers is the tool to use to get the master link in behind there and connected. The new models, you may be able to pull the gear forward on the shaft a little bit and install the chain with the master link connected. Make sure every moving part in here is well lubricated. And the last thing we'll do, again, don't distort the snap ring when you install it. So I've gone ahead and buttoned this up after installing the chain without distorting the snap ring, and the unit looked exactly as it did when I took it out of the box. I put the outer cover on. Now the outer cover isn't designed to seal anything. You don't need any sealer. There is no gasket. If there's oil behind this cover, you might have a little that's come from things you've lubricated in there, but the transmission oil itself is not under this cover. Remember the gap that was under the ball and ramp tail, remember the gap at the ball and ramp. If you were to lay the motorcycle on its side, oil could run out there. It cannot return. This is very important. It must be refilled through the fill hole here where I have an Allen wrench that we're going to use as a dipstick. So if you're repairing it, make sure the chain is lubed up. As I said, make sure every moving part inside the cover is lubed up. Install the outer cover. I don't Loctite the socket head cap screws here. I use a T-handle. Torque them properly. Don't have a problem. I want to have easy access in case I need to remove the cover. The oil fill bolt is removed. We are preparing to add some fluid. This is the fluid I drained out. It's a small funnel, it's a small hole. You have to have patience adding the fluid. for two reasons. One, if you fill it too fast, it can run out again over the ball and ramp. Secondly, there's only a small hole to let the fluid enter into the gearbox itself. And when the motorcycle is on its kickstand, all the oil is over to that side. It's not a bad idea to occasionally, when you're sitting on the motorcycle preparing to ride, lean it a bit to the right and wait and let oil flood the throwout bearing and starter clutch bushing side of the transmission. As far as fluids go on a dry transmission, you may need 2 to 4 ounces less. The reason is the flat side of the right side starter against your transmission face does not have the cavity that your kicker cover had. So to achieve the same depth of oil, it may take a little bit less than the 3/4 of a quart to the 1.5 pints that the book calls for. Regardless, add oil until you have 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch on an improvised dipstick. Don't be fooled by a little bit on the end. There's a drill point, and that may capture some fluid. You'll always have a little bit on the end. Make sure you have 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch of depth of oil on that improvised dipstick. I haven't yet reinstalled the exhaust and the floorboard or the battery here, but we're going to talk about finishing the project. So let's imagine that has all been done and we're ready to start the motorcycle. Be sure your ignition timing is correct. Be sure the right side starter wasn't purchased to try to start an ill-running machine. You must be properly tuned. Any kickback from incorrect timing may break something, and that's not going to be warranted. And it may be the starter clutch on the end of your main shaft, may be the weakest link in the chain, and you may destroy your transmission. Be sure your ignition timing is correct and the motorcycle is in tune. Neutral, as always. I don't know why I need to say this. You wouldn't kickstart the motorcycle in gear. Why would you electric start it in gear? But neutral, you must be in neutral. The clutch engaged, exactly like you were going to kickstart the motorcycle. The push button switch installed on the left side of the motorcycle or the handlebars. Reason, you may need your right hand for the throttle. Install your battery, finally your ground wire, and with your ignition switch off, test crank the engine. I'd like to do that with the spark plugs removed. If everything sounds normal, I'm going to reinstall the spark plugs and go through the same routine I would when I kicked the bike for a normal start. In other words, prime with choke, whatever you normally do. Warm start, you'll need nothing but to turn the key on and crank the bike. Test ride it. More than likely, your clutch cable is going to stretch. Check the lubrication, the tightness, and adjustments occasionally under the cover. If you are repairing a right side starter, do the test and lubrication the same as the installation video shows. And as far as repair goes, the first thing, if we have a no cranking situation, a failure to crank the motorcycle, the battery is the first thing to suspect. Either isolate your battery or just jump start it. Just be sure you have a good battery before you tear down and suspect something in the starter motor. What I hope you find from a right side starter is one of the things I commonly hear at the swap meets when I demonstrate the right side starter. A mechanic will come up who has installed the starter for someone and he'll say, you know, old so-and-so has ridden that motorcycle more in the last year or so since I installed the starter than he rode it 10 years prior. That's what we like to hear. Many safe miles. Thank you.